What's up, y'all? What's good? Welcome to the What Up Doe Show. It's your boy Dame D, and I am back with another one. Today is Monday, and there is no autopsy report has come back yet for Nolan Wells. So I'm gonna wait for a few people to come in before we start today's conversation up. And let me check to make sure you guys can hear me. My audio and video is good. It was a good conversation last night. I want to apologize. We were having some problems with my camera staying in focus. So let me make sure that you guys can hear me and see me good. Wait on a few people to jump in too. Okay, we look good. We look good right there. So I'm gonna come out. Check the other one. So what's good Facebook? What's good Instagram? What's good YouTube? Hopefully everybody can hear me and see me clearly. Wait for a few people to come in. Okay. So we look good right there. What up, though? So your boy, we still closing down on 1K subscribers. So I still need for you guys to make sure you hitting that subscribe button on your way in. Yep. So yeah, we just chopping it up for a little bit. Monday has come. They promised us an autopsy report today. There's no autopsy report that has come back yet on this young man. So my question to you guys is: are they trying to spin us? Do you think they're setting up for some bullshit? Because they, I'm not going to say they promised, but we were hearing that the autopsy report was supposed to come back today, which we know the family sent out for a second autopsy report. But, we thought that the original autopsy report was going to come back from what the police did today. And from what the detectives did over the weekend. It's been 7 days, and normally you would have heard at least something today. I have a few videos that I may try to play. We've been having a little technical difficulties with our Wi-Fi or whatnot. I don't know what's going on, but yeah, man, it's a disgrace. What's been going on in this case. In my opinion, I think they're setting up for the same old. When this autopsy report does come back, because it's been too much evidence. It's been too much allegations, too many speculations that this young man made it back to land, was at a party. Some things went on, and then he was into an altercation with these so-called friends. So my opinion, my question to everyone, and this is everyone's question: why haven't these so-called friends been brought up for questioning yet? Because that's where all the answers is going to come from these three friends. Like I said, I'm going to keep, talking about this situation. I thought the autopsy report was going to come back and we would get some type of answers today for all the questions that we have. But, it's been a lot of videos of his so-called friends or just videos circulating out there, about how he did make it back to land and he was at a party and an altercation went on. Austin was hurt, and the speculations about that they found the young men at one of the other friends' house whose mother was a judge, and they said they were cleaning the boat out that night. And what's so mighty fishy, which a lot of people don't understand, is when the father went out, when they originally went out there to that island and was looking for his body, they did not find it. But the next day after everything happened, after the friends cleaned out the boat, they redid a search and they found his body, found his body out there. So, it's just a lot of fishy shit going on with these friends, so in my opinion, I don't know why the authorities have not brought these friends in for interrogation, because you'll get a lot of answer questions that we're looking for through these three friends. So, at the end of the day, man, the law enforcement is protecting these three friends. They're holding back a lot of information. So, in my opinion, this case definitely has a lot more to it, and I think in the days to come, we will be hearing about how at least one or more of these friends will be brought, at least in to speak to authorities about what's going on, because it's just been too many, like I said, speculations and allegations about, what happened when this young man had made it back to land. Because now a lot of people thought that an incident happened on that island, but now from hearing new speculations out there that this young man made it back. He made it back home, made it back to this party, and that's when everything happened at this so-called party that he went to. But at the end of the day, I just want justice for this young man's parents, and then just justice overall. Because we're seeing too many cases like this throughout the country, with black men hanging out with their so-called white friends coming up dead or missing. So we definitely have to get down to the bottom of this. I want to come on for a second, chop it up, because I've been surfing the net trying to look and see if this autopsy report came back, and I have not saw anything. I have not. No one has talked about it. And they talked about it over the weekend, like how this report was coming back today, and then there's nothing. So I'm getting a little. I'm not going to say a little impatient, but something it's been over 7 days. I got a video that I do want to play. I'm gonna play that real quick, and hopefully, let me add that to the screen. Yeah, but if you guys want to put some input and come in and chop it up with your boy, put your email in, and I'll bring you on in, and we can talk about it. But I'm gonna try to play this video. Hopefully, this video will play. Okay, so I'm gonna play this video for a little bit. Hopefully, it'll play without no buffering. If so, then I'll just stop it. But yeah, there has not been. No one's talking about this autopsy report today, which they said it was coming back today. So I don't understand what's going on. But here we go. I'm gonna play this video, and then we'll get back to commentary after that.
Found off the coast of Mississippi at Horn Island, where he was spending the 4th of July with friends. Those friends returned to the mainland without him, and his family reported him missing. Over a week later, we still don't have any public release of the autopsy reports, and it all comes in a state with a dark history. Mississippi is home to more lynchings of Black people than any other state in the nation. Now, there's two types of autopsy reports. There's a preliminary report and there's a final report. The preliminary report, according to the state of Mississippi's own medical examiner's office, can be performed in as little as 2 hours. It's been several days since they've performed their autopsy, and that report has not been made public as of Monday, July 13th. Now, the family, in their independent autopsy investigation, they've obtained, Attorney Ben Crump as their lawyer. Tyler Perry has offered to pay for the funeral. Colin Kaepernick has helped to fly Wells's body to D.C. for this independent investigation. The preliminary report could come at any day, but according to D.C.'s Office of the Chief Medical Examiner, the final report could take anywhere from 60 to 90 days. So, as we are on social media trying to decipher fact from fiction, the full final report could take even longer than we expect. I'm Dion Osborne. Follow In Depth with Dion. Hey, y'all. So here's what to know about Nolan.
So yeah, and even what this young man was saying, the actual let me stop this. The actual autopsy report, can take several months, so I don't really know what's going on, why they reported that the autopsy would come back today. We've been waiting on that. Like I said, over the weekend, there were talks about that today. The autopsy report was going to come back with this young man. But, at the end of the day, man, I think they're trying to protect these friends. That's why we have not heard any interrogations come yet, because we had a judge. I showed video of an ex-Mississippi judge yesterday, and he spoke about, the business and how things go on down there in Mississippi, and how, when he sat on the bench, if this case came in front of him, he would have definitely sent out warrants, to have these young men brought in to, at least be interrogated or ask questions, so it's definitely a cover up going on in this situation. These one of the parents of this young man, of one of the young men were, mother was a judge. So, they're definitely protecting these friends. They're definitely, protecting each other, so that's why, and the judge even spoke about that, said he also said if this was one of his family members, he would tell them to lower you up and really not speak out. So, you can't blame the mother, you can't blame the young men, who was out there for not speaking up, because at the end of the day, everyone wants to, try to protect himself. But at the end of the day, man, to me, it just looks fishy that if these so-called friends was his friends, they would have been out there trying to look for this man in the search, and that's what makes everything to me just look fishy. When they asked one of the young men that was involved in the situation that was out there on the boat, they said, you guys already expect that we did something. So, at the end of the day, it's just a lot of fishy stuff that's going on, because if these were this young man's friends, they would have been out there in the search, they would have immediately called the parents trying to give this young man's phone back and his keys back to his vehicle. So, it's just a lot of unanswered questions that, the people looking at these situations, like, why isn't the authorities, bringing all these so-called friends of his who he went out there on that boat with in for questioning, so that makes it look like to the public, to the people, from the outside looking in, looks like these young men are hiding something, and the authorities are backing them up, and just like on that video I played, Mississippi, is one of the original stomping grounds for, racism, against blacks. A lot of lynchings, hangings, and, injustice went on, in that state right there alone. So it looks like they're just, pretty much up to the same old that they've been, up to since, we've been here. So I just want to come on and speak about that situation for a little bit. And the comment section is open. I would love to hear you guys' comments. I would love to hear what you guys think about this case. Do you think that they're going to come back with foul play, that this young man was murdered, or do you think they're going to come back with some the same old bullshit that they normally come back when it's dealing with, a young black man? No foul play. Basically, what do you call that when like a drowning? So it'll probably come back like Sorry about that, but yeah, so at the end of the day, man, we've been seeing cases like this when it's dealing with black folks, and at the end of the day, we just have to be careful, who we're hanging out with, because at the end of the day, man, I was just sitting here going through my folder, and normally I jot down notes, but I've done so many cases on black men and women who have strangely disappeared or lives were taken, by just being around, or just being in certain states, or just being with their white friends, so this isn't a coincidence, this has been going on throughout the country, and it's been all over the mainstream media. A lot of these cases has been covered up, but it's thank God for the the YouTubers and the other podcasters out there that's been bringing a lot of these stories to the light, because the mainstream media will not, in situations like that, will not, cover a lot of these unjustified murders we've been seeing, these hangings, with our people. They will not cover this. They'll cover this shit up. So therefore, it's up to a lot of the podcasters that you see that's talking about this stuff. We have to do our due justice and keep these stories like this alive, because we've been seeing too many. I've done multiple stories this year alone, and I can count on basically two hands of stories, and it's just recently, just another story. Another young man was just found hanging again, right after this Nolan Wells situation, so this isn't a coincidence, and I advise everybody who's and I'm not going to even say in these southern states, but a lot of this stuff has been happening in these southern states. But we recently just had an incident where a young man from Illinois drove all the way down to Michigan, and he was found hanging on the fence. So I'm not going to just limit it to the southern states. It's been happening all throughout the country. So we definitely have to be careful who we call our so-called friends, who we're traveling with, who's at these locations and things like that. Because lies are definitely been have been took, and trusting, being with your so-called with these so-called friends, and that's what happened. Okay, look like we're having a little. Okay, there we go. Yeah, that's crazy. I don't know what's going on with my focus on my cameras, but everything has been coming unfocused. But yeah, you just have to watch the friends that you hang with, and I'm gonna keep saying this. I'm gonna keep saying this, or you'll find yourself hanging by yourself. So. But yeah, the comment section is definitely open. I would love to hear you guys' thoughts. I would love to hear you guys' opinion on this Nolan Wells situation. We thought an autopsy report was going to come back today, but no autopsy report has come back yet. So in my opinion, I really think they're really trying to buy time to try to cover up this situation. So I'm going to keep doing my due diligence, talking about this situation and bringing it. Bringing information to you guys, keeping this story alive. Because that's what they want. They want us to forget about this story. They want this story to, not be talked about, so they can sweep it up under the rug. But I'm going to do my due diligence by continuing to talk about this story, and just continuing to keep this alive, because like I said, at the end of the day, this could have been one of your sons, this could have been my son, one of your family members. So, we definitely want to see justice. We definitely want to get ahead of this, because like I said, there's been too many Black men and women losing their lives due to, I'll just keep it real, due to racism. Yep. So, and like I said, man, I can name multiple stories. The young man, I believe his name was Jared Jackson, drove down here from Illinois with a group of white friends, and this young man ended up losing his life. They found this and the mainstream media is really not even talking about that case, and they're really not talking about what actually happened to this young man. This young man rented a car, drove all the way down from Illinois to enjoy this electric festival with his friends, and these friends were white friends, and then we got to ask ourselves, what is going on, with with all these cases dealing with white friends, and then at the end of the day, you have Black men and women that's coming up dead or missing, in most cases dead. Yep. So I hope my let me make sure that my audio is showing right on here. It looks blurry. All right, so hopefully everything is everything. You guys can see me clearly, hear me clearly. But yeah, at the end of the day, man, I just want to see justice for this young man. I want to see justice for all these cases that we've been hearing out throughout the country. So we got to continue to be careful. Hey, these so-called friends that we're calling our friends are not our friends, especially with this case with Nolan Wells. Those guys were not his friends, not once did they try to form a search party, not once were they out there looking, for this young man. They're definitely hiding something. They're definitely covering up some things, because true friends would be out there. They would have been out there that night. They would have been out there until they found that young man. We would have not left that island until we brought that young man back. That's what true friends would have done. That's what true friends are. True friends will not leave you on an island to die. In which we come to believe that that's not how that young man died. We're hearing that this young man made it back and went to a party, and a situation happened, and he was beat up and he was battered, allegedly, and then they took him back to this island and dumped his body, because like the father even said, they went out there July the 5th, I believe, or the 4th. I got a comment. Nubian King, if you're Black, you were born in jail in the North as well as the South. Stop talking about the South. Long as the south of the Canada border, or South Malcolm American is a suntown. Yeah, I mean, American is a sundown town, and and a lot of our people have been getting caught in these sundown towns. We have to recognize and realize, especially in the South, where we're at. When we're hanging out with these so-called, white friends. Because at the end of the day, like I said, I was just sitting here scrolling through my notepad, and I can count on my hand. I don't know what's going on with my. I can count on my hand, with both hands, how many cases that we've talked about. Yeah, I'm gonna have to switch my camera. I don't know what the hell is going on. But yeah, I can talk about multiple cases where blacks were out with white friends where they didn't make it back, or they just came up missing. So we gotta ask ourselves, what's really going on out here? And in my opinion, I think we're being targeted. I think they're one by one taking us out, under the cover of drownings and the cover of, and I'm just going to be honest, a lot of these cases, I think the authorities have their hands in it, especially with these hangings that we've been seeing throughout the country. How are you going to get a black man or a black woman out of a car? Because it's going to take a couple of people to be able to lift you up, hang you, and do things like that, and then not only that, in my opinion, I think the authorities has a lot to do with it, because at the end of the day, the authorities can pull you over, they can get you out of your car, and they can handcuff you. And once they handcuff you, they can do whatever they want to do with you, So at the end of the day, that's why a lot of people think that, when they come out there and they investigate these situations, there's no foul play, no evidence, therefore, the authorities will call these cases suicides, so therefore when they call these cases suicide, there's no investigation, so that's why I'm hoping that when this Nolan Wells autopsy report it comes back correctly. Hopefully they find out what really happened to this young man, and they won't say it's I forget the word as far as the accidental drowning. Because I know that that's basically what they're trying to set up for, accidental drowning. And if once they come in and say it's an accidental drowning, then the authorities will not do any more reports. So that's why the family of this young man sent his body out for a second autopsy report. Because at the end of the day, we know that's what the what it looks like these authorities are going to be setting up for. I don't know what's going on with my focus. Hopefully everybody can hear me and see me good, but I'm looking at it. It looks like my cameras are not focusing today. And I had that issue last night, so I may have to cut everything short and correct this problem that I'm having. But yeah, man, at the end of the day, this young man deserves justice. I'm going to continue talking about this case, because at the end of the day, to me, in my opinion, these three friends of his are being protected by the authorities. And it's been allegedly, well, not even allegedly, because the young woman, one of the friends' mom, who was the judge, came out and spoke about the situation, trying to clear their names up or trying to clear herself up, So, but at the end of the day, I think it's definitely a cover up. Yeah, I'm trying to fix these. I don't know what the hell is going on with my cameras. So I apologize. I just want to come in for a second and talk about this situation. I'm definitely getting ready to try to clear this up. Yeah, because I'm looking at what you guys are looking at, and I do not like how that looks. So yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and end this, man. I'm gonna come back. We'll probably come back later and talk about. I really want to stay on here and talk about this situation where we got all these mall shootings going on. With our people, these shootings. We just had another shooting, this Great Lakes shooting. We just had a shooting at Fairlane Mall. We're talking about what's going on with the, whites, black on white crime. We need to, get ahead of things and talk about this black on black crime, because it's getting out of hand that, with all these mall shootings and it's involved with these, our youth. At the end of the day, it's going to be a point where they're going to, either shut these malls down or just not allow a certain group of people to come out and patronize at these malls. We just, like I said, I just spoke about a shooting at the Fairlane Mall about a week ago, and not even a week later, we hear about another shooting at this Great Lakes Mall. But yeah, man, I'm getting ready to try to figure out this problem that I have with my audio. I don't know what's going on when my cameras are not focusing, so I'm going to go ahead and end the show and try to fix that problem. And I'll probably be back in a little bit. I don't know what the hell is going on. So look, I need you guys to like, comment, subscribe, and share. It's another one. It's your boy Dame D, and I am out. Peace.